Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into something that really blew my mind about a sport you might think is just, standing quietly in a river with a rod. As it turns out, American fly fishing has produced some of the absolute richest, most captivating outdoor literature in history. We're going to unpack exactly how this pursuit evolved from a simple outdoor pastime into a deeply philosophical, highly scientific, and even dramatic literary genre. Think about that quote for a second. This single sentence completely reframes the entire sport. This isn't just some dry manual on how to tie a knot. It's a literal journey of profound reading and discovery. From Pulitzer-nominated novellas to scuba diving entomology studies that completely changed how artificial flies are tied, the literature of fly fishing genuinely offers something for everyone, whether you've never held a rod or you're a seasoned expert. Let's kick things off with Section 1, the soul of the sport. So when we talk about the why of fly fishing, these are the heavy hitters that basically built the sport's cultural mythology. You simply cannot talk about this genre without starting with Norman Maclean's 1976 novella, A River Runs Through It. It had an unparalleled cultural impact. Actually, fun fact, it was recommended for the 1977 Pulitzer Prize before the advisory board controversially withheld the award that year. But the soul of the sport goes way beyond Maclean. You've got David James Duncan's The River Why, which totally rejects a numbers-obsessed approach in favor of ecological communion and deep humor. Then there's Thomas McGuane capturing the sheer physical and psychological endurance the sport demands, Nick Lyons using a tiny spring creek as a metaphor for aging, and Mark Kurlansky exploring the vital and often overlooked history of female pioneers. Now, what's really fascinating here is how the tone of this literature shifted over the years. For the longest time, the sport had this very aristocratic, formal, status-driven reputation. But writers like John Gierach and Robert Traver completely flipped the script. They essentially invented the Trout bum ethos. It's this incredibly self-deprecating, casual, anti-elitist essay style that made the sport wonderfully accessible. They famously prioritized time on the water over building a career or gaining status. It really showed us that you don't need to be a wealthy aristocrat to appreciate the profound joy of a good catch. Moving right along to Section 2, the science of the catch. Because hey, underneath all that beautiful poetry, there is a fierce, hardcore foundation of biology. Take author Gary LaFontaine, for example. This guy literally spent a decade scuba diving in rivers just to observe how trout react to artificial flies underwater. Talk about dedication. Through this obsessive citizen science, he discovered that emerging caddis pupae actually have these tiny air bubble sheaths around them. This singular discovery led directly to the invention of the sparkle pupa patterns that anglers all over the world still rely on today. And this perfectly illustrates how empirical science completely upended American fly tying forever. Back in 1971, Doug Swisher and Carl Richards published a book called Selective Trout. They made the case that traditional, heavily hackled flies created a totally unnatural silhouette that educated, smart trout could easily spot and avoid. Their solution was the no-hackle dry fly. It was a massive disruption to the status quo, and it's still considered one of the most influential discoveries in the history of the sport. All right, on to Section 3, mechanics and advanced tactics. Let's be real, all those perfect flies mean absolutely zero if you can't deliver them properly. And the literature of instruction here is just as rich as the prose. You have Joan Wolfe, a national casting champion, who was the first to break casting down into precise, teachable mechanics, instead of just using vague metaphors. Then you have the absolute brilliance of Sheridan Anderson's comic book, The Curtis Creek Manifesto. It's a 48-page comic that somehow teaches reading water and basic rigging better than most 300-page textbooks. On the advanced tactical side, Joe Humphreys teaches the invaluable side pressure technique for landing massive fish without snapping your line. George Daniel brought European drag-free nymphing to the American mainstream, and Kelly Galloup and Bob Linzement literally rewrote the playbook on using massive articulated streamers to hunt the biggest, most predatory trout in the river. Let's expand our map a bit. Section 4, expanding the world into saltwater and regional waters. If you're ready to leave the trout streams in the rearview mirror, the world of saltwater fly fishing radically expands the genre, and it has its own wild history. Monty Burke's book, Lords of the Fly, captures this perfectly. It documents the obsessive hunt in the 1970s and 80s to catch record-breaking tarpon on a fly rod in Homosassa, Florida. It's a crazy character study of the outsized egos who nearly drove themselves mad chasing 150-pound silver kings on incredibly light line. Throw in foundational Bibles by legends like Lefty Kreh, and you'll find that saltwater literature is as gripping as any top-tier sports thriller. And since local knowledge pretty much always beats generic advice, regional guidebooks are an absolute must. Just looking across the map shows how local ecology dictates your strategy. In the karst spring creeks of the Driftless area, John Van Vliet's guide is essential. If you are chasing native brook trout in the Blue Ridge Mountains, Chris Camuto blends ecology and history flawlessly. And if you're heading to the iconic Madison River out west, Craig Matthews gives you the ultimate deep dive. So, where do you even begin? Section 5. Choosing your next read. With so many phenomenal books out there, it can definitely feel a little overwhelming. So let's break down exactly how to choose your entry point by matching your current skill level and interest. Brand new and just trying to understand a basic lead or not, start with Step 1, the Curtis Creek Manifesto. It is super approachable. Want to understand the romance and why people fish before you ever cast a line? Step 2 points you straight to Maclean's A River Runs Through It. Already on the water but want to catch more fish? Step 3 says you need the hardcore science of selective trout. And if you're booking a guide for the ocean flats, Step 4 makes Lefty Kray's Saltwater Bible mandatory reading. But before we wrap up this explainer, we have to look at Section 6, the dark side of obsession. We really have to look at the extremes of this sport because it has spawned some bizarre true crime history. 299. That is the exact number of rare bird skins stolen in 2009 from the British Museum of Natural History. As detailed in Kirk Wallace Johnson's gripping book, The Feather Thief, this massive heist wasn't pulled off by some international crime syndicate. Nope, it was executed by a young American fly tyer. He needed the rare feathers to feed a lucrative underground market of enthusiasts totally obsessed with tying traditional Victorian salmon flies. It is wild, and it proves that the culture of fly fishing is vast, intense, and full of surprising corners. So from minimalist philosophies that argue less is more, to the hilarious self-deprecation of the trout bums, to underground feather thievery at a British museum, the literary tradition of fly fishing is just incredibly rich. It proves that this pursuit is far more than a technique. It's a profound way to interact with the world. The only question left is, will you read for the romance, the science, or the obsession? Which waters will you cast into first? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. See you next time.